Google loses money on the cheapest search its rivals can run. Every competitor pays more to answer the exact same question, and that gap is the moat. In 2026, the bill on that gap is finally coming due. For years, the story about Google was distribution and data, and both of those matter. But the deeper advantage hides down in the plumbing, where almost nobody bothers to look. Every single search you run costs Google something real to serve. Crawling the web, storing the index, ranking and returning an answer. Google pulls in around $350 billion in revenue a year, and that scale is the whole setup. That revenue figure comes straight from Alphabet's most recent annual report, not from a slide deck. But the scale is not the point by itself. What matters is what it does to the cost of one query. The moat here is a cost advantage, plain and simple, not brand and not loyalty. It is a structural gap in what it actually costs to answer a single query. Let's walk through how that gap gets built, one layer at a time. Start with the foundation, because everything else stacks on top of it. Google's fixed costs to crawl, index, and serve get spread across trillions of queries, which drives the cost of each search far below what any smaller rival can reach. This is fixed cost leverage, where huge upfront costs get cheaper per unit as the volume climbs. Google built the index once, it crawls the web once, then it answers query after query against that same machinery. That revenue scale, spread across the entire planet's worth of searches, pushes those fixed costs incredibly thin. A rival serving a sliver of the volume pays far more for every single answer. The denominator is the weapon, because the more queries you serve, the cheaper each one becomes. That is the first reveal most people walk right past. A brand new entrant faces the same crawl bill, the same index cost, the same serving stack as Google does, but they split it across a tiny slice of the traffic, so their cost per query starts high and stays high. Google's starts low and keeps falling, so the gap doesn't narrow with effort, it widens with every search. Now look at the second layer, and it's the one rivals badly underestimate. Google designs its own chips in-house, which cuts the cost of every inference compared to renting chips at market price, lowering the cost of ranking and AI search answers competitors must pay retail for. When a pure-play AI search startup answers a question, it pays the going rate for every chip cycle, while Google pays cost. That difference compounds across billions of queries a day, so custom silicon becomes a permanent discount on the single biggest input to AI search. And the timing matters more now than it ever has, because generative answers burn far more compute than a plain list of blue links ever did. So the chip bill is the new front line, and a rival paying market prices on that compute is racing straight uphill while Google designed the hill. Next, look at the third layer, the actual ground the whole system runs on. Most rivals rent their infrastructure from a cloud provider, but Google builds its own data centers, lays its own subsea cables, and caches answers close to you, cutting the serving cost per query that renters cannot match. Google spends somewhere north of $50 billion a year building all of that out. That number terrifies most companies, but for Google, it's simply the price of paying cost instead of rent. Renting feels cheaper, right up until you're serving trillions of queries, and then ownership wins by a mile. A rival renting cloud capacity pays a margin to the landlord on every query, while Google is its own landlord and keeps the margin a competitor just hands away. Owning the wires, the servers, and the caches removes a tax that rivals keep paying forever. But here's the turn, the part that runs deeper than today's search. Every query and click teaches Google's system what a good answer looks like, so each unit of relevance costs Google less to produce than a rival rebuilding that signal from scratch. This is the flywheel, a loop where every spin makes the next one easier. Google handles roughly 9 in every 10 searches on Earth, so it sees more of those lessons than anyone alive. A rival has to buy or rebuild that signal, while Google already has it, sitting there nearly free. So the data doesn't just improve the quality of answers, it lowers the cost of that quality, and that's the amplifier on the entire moat. The better and cheaper Google's ranking gets, the more queries it wins, which makes the ranking better and cheaper still. A challenger trying to break in has to pay for both halves of that loop at the same time. The fifth layer is the one that feeds all of the other four. Pre-installed default search across browsers and Android hands, Google a flood of queries at almost no cost to acquire. Deepening the base, it spreads its fixed costs over. More queries means a bigger base to spread the fixed costs over, which lowers cost per query further, which funds even more infrastructure. Google runs a gross margin of roughly 58%, which is room most rivals will never see. Its operating margin sits around 32%, and that's the cushion that funds the next round of building. Margin is just what's left after costs, and here the cost edge is the source of all of it. But a moat is only real if it survives an actual attack, and the pure-play AI search rivals are running generative answers at the highest cost per query in the market. Economics, the coming earnings expose as structurally unsustainable against Google's amortized base, which makes this cost moat present tense. The very weapon they hoped would beat Google is the thing quietly draining them dry. So step back and look at what we've actually uncovered here. The brand was never the moat, and the data was never the whole story. Underneath all of it sits one number rivals cannot touch: the cost to answer a single query, the lowest on Earth. So here is what to carry away from all of this. Google's real advantage isn't that it answers your questions better, it's that it answers them cheaper. By a margin nobody can close. Every layer feeds the same engine: fixed costs spread wider, custom chips, owned data centers, and a data flywheel push the cost per answer lower still. The new AI search rivals arrived believing that better answers alone would win. They may be discovering that the economics, not the algorithms, are what decide who actually survives. So watch the coming earnings of the companies chasing Google, because the real question is whether they can afford to keep giving those answers away.